Radio TV Phono Nut here, and I have a Coronado little 4-tube battery operated set from the early 40s that we recently did a repair video on, but I just never got around to uploading it to YouTube. That video, along with many other repair videos that we'll get around to putting up over the coming weeks, including an EOL video on this Olsen radio. You know, I don't like busting up tube radios, but that one was in really bad shape and it just wouldn't cooperate. So it got sacrificed for parts to fix other things, but there'll be a video on that along with the other stuff. And right now, let's get into the video of this thing.
If you found a good one, go.
But before we get into that, I'd like to take a few minutes and talk to you about my good friend, and your good friend, Jordan Peer, also known as JP Dillon. I think most anybody in the vintage electronics collecting and repair community knows of Jordan. He has an electronics repair operation in the San Diego area where he specializes in vintage electronics repair and servicing. Things like old stereo and hi-fi stuff, televisions, radios, record players, record changers, vintage test equipment, console stereos, if it falls under the heading of vintage electronics. Jordan has probably messed with it at some point in time, and he is very good and very professional at what he does. Now, I don't know Jordan personally, but I've been keeping up with him for years, even back in the Video Karma days. That was an online vintage electronics, mainly TV and radio message forum board, whatever you want to call it. And then when Facebook came along, we connected on there, and then when he started posting videos on YouTube, started watching his YouTube videos. And I'm going to tell you, whether it be on Video Karma, Facebook, or on YouTube, Jordan has been very eager and willing to help those out in need with their vintage electronics projects. In fact, he's helped me out more than once whenever I'd get stumped on something, and that's what it's all about. Those of us who are in the vintage electronics hobby or business, we need to help each other when we can. And right now, Jordan needs our help. Turned on to YouTube today and was watching Shango 066's latest video, and it seems that Jordan's YouTube channel was terminated here 2 or 3 days ago, and the reason given was the standard canned computer-generated response that your channel violates our community standards, so therefore we're terminating your account. And that means that all of the videos that Jordan has worked so hard putting together over the past several years, they're no longer there. They're gone. And, you know, he went to a lot of effort and expense putting those videos together just to help us out and to keep us entertained. And like I said, he needs our help right now. And I've been watching his videos for years. I've been following him on the various social media outlets for years, and I've never known Jordan to be anything but professional. In fact, he's one of the more professional guys that I know of. He's not posting spam on his YouTube channel. He's not posting inappropriate content. In fact, we need more channels on YouTube like his. You know, it would be a lot better, YouTube would be a lot better platform if we had more channels like Jordan's. And like I said, he's helped us out a lot over the years, and right now he needs our help to help get his channel reinstated. Several years ago, the same thing happened to Shango 066, and Fortunately, he was able to get his channel back, and I feel like part of the reason for that is because we all came together and expressed our support for his channel, and we all need to come together and express our support for JP Dillon's YouTube channel. If you're one that has a YouTube channel where you regularly upload videos, it would probably be a good idea for you to put in a positive plug for George's channel and demand that it be reinstated and all of his videos be returned intact. But that's what it's going to take to get this done. You know, we're just all going to have to come together and say, hey, we want his channel back. He's a professional, and we know he didn't do anything to violate community guidelines. And if y'all say that he did something to violate community guidelines, we want more than just a canned computer-generated response. We want an in-depth reply as to what led to this. You know, I remember one time I was working on a newer solid-state stereo amplifier for a friend, like something from the black plastic crap era, and that's really not my forte, but I was trying to help a friend out, and I was working on it and beating my head against the wall and pulling what little hair I got left out, and I mentioned something on Facebook about it, and Jordan chimed in, and he said, yeah, it's probably one of the STK packs, driver packs, it's bad. That's a common problem on those. And I went and checked what he told me to check, and sure enough, that was what was wrong with it. And I installed a new STK pack in it, and my friend has been using his stereo receiver for a few years now since that happened. So, like I said earlier, Jordan's been very generous to us in the vintage electronics community, and he's been very helpful, and he needs our help now. So let us all come together and return the favor and do everything we can to get his channel reinstated, whether that means contacting the head knockers at YouTube or posting something on your own YouTube page or Facebook page or putting it in a YouTube video or whatever. But the more the merrier. Okay. Let's get into the repair of this thing and more to come later. This is Radio TV Phono Nut, and here's a Coronado tube radio. This was another one of those cheap eBay purchases, a gamble. And what you're seeing is what I saw on eBay, just the front of the radio with the chassis obviously dismounted, the dial pointer laying down there, not attached. I didn't see any knobs, so I said, well, what the heck, I'll bid on it, maybe I can do something with it. I was clued in that this was a battery set because I could see the little indicator on the dial that turns red whenever you turn the set on. So I got the radio and found a pleasant surprise, the knobs and the chassis mounting screws and a little baggie in the back of the set. So evidently somebody pulled this apart to work on it and then gave up on it, and I think I know why they gave up on it. Here's the battery plug, and it looks like an adapter to allow the plugs on this radio. This is an older type arrangement, but this is an adapter to allow the standard 90 volt and 1.5 volt battery pack to be used. But here's where the problem comes in. Someone attached an AC power cord to the antenna and ground connections, so I can just imagine the antenna coil is going to be cremated. I mean, I see stuff like this and I have to ask myself, what's wrong with people? I mean, this is just shows that whoever did this was totally clueless. Alright, the chassis is a bit of a rust bucket. The speaker is in pretty bad shape, and we can hear the cone dragging. Now let's flip the chassis up so we can have a heart attack together. Well, it doesn't look like anybody has monkeyed with it, but I see this set has permeability slug tuning, which means there is no antenna coil, which means they probably they probably burned up the coil on the tuner, which is even worse. If it had a separate antenna coil, we could get around that. Well, it looks like there's a mica cap between the antenna input and the coil here. That would still pass AC, but the value of it is so small that hopefully the current was limited to a level that it didn't obliterate this antenna coil. So let's get it in here to the bench and do a little check out on it. I mean, yeah, I appreciate the power cord that I can use on something else, but if you don't know what you're doing, leave it the heck alone. Don't just assume because two wires are sticking out the back of a radio, then that's where you're supposed to tie 120 volts AC. Now, let me get this to the bench and see how much is really blown up in this thing. Hopefully not much. Okay, the tubes all have good filaments. I read continuity across the power plug, and the coils on this tuner have good continuity as best I can tell, so thank goodness for that mica capacitor, because if it wasn't for that, this radio would have been blown apart, and I don't know that it would have been worth trying to repair. So I need to go dig up a battery eliminator, and we'll put some power to this and see what it does. Alright, we're connected to a battery eliminator, and this jumper is the filament jumper. You're supposed to connect it to one position for 4 tube sets and another position for 5 and 6 tube sets. I just have it clipped to where I get about 1.4 volts under the load of these 4 tubes. Alright, let's see what happens. Now, this battery eliminator uses a tube rectifier for the high voltage, so alright, I'm hearing some humming here. Alright, volume all the way up.
Wait, obviously get these guys ready for the season, but I think
nice.
It's a strong argument that it's the safest option they would have, being in a controlled.
And all we have is this little stubby wire for an antenna. So
you've got great healthcare right there and great opportunities to take care of it. So I'm fascinated to see what happens with it.
Yeah, let's connect it to the outside antenna and see what we can pick up.
Since we're in January, so I can't imagine what you're headed towards.
1390. And the sports station's back at 1450, but yeah, this is pretty impressive considering it hasn't been serviced or aligned.
Sports radio. Yeah, it's plainly.
Alright, I'm checking the B+ voltage. Unloaded, we have 150 volts coming out of the power supply. Loaded, we have about 73, 74 volts. So something's loading it down a little bit. And we have a bit of a positive voltage on the control grid of the output tube, no surprise, but yeah, all these capacitors we know we're going to need to go. Alright, this plate to grid coupling cap from the audio circuit is our main culprit. Even with it disconnected, I'm still getting a little leak through. But on the end that connects to the grid, we're getting about 30 some odd volts there. And our B+ jumped up to 98 volts. So yeah, let's replace this capacitor with a nice good one and see what that does for it. It can't hurt nothing. It'll only have to improve things. While I'm here, I might as well check the grid bias resistor. It's supposed to be a 2 meg, red, black, green. What's the meter say it is? The meter says it's about 8.8 meg ohms, so it's gone way up and needs to be replaced.
Has been a good friend.
All right, replace that cap and resistor.
Who I'm still close with, Bill. Who I've actually been to his house in Montana.
98 volts. That brought the B plus way up.
John Pax, I see almost regularly with the Bulls still. So, yeah, I know a lot of these guys. Craig Hodges, I just talked to.
It's a good bit louder, too, which I figured it would be.
A lot of the former Bulls. Dennis Hobson I speak with.
I know I've mentioned this many times before, but for the sake of those of you who may not have seen my other videos, I'll mention it again. This is the old coupling capacitor that came out of the radio, and its purpose is to block DC while allowing an alternating current signal, in this case our audio modulation, to pass from the plate of the first audio tube to the control grid of the audio output tube. Well, over time, these capacitors get bored with being capacitors, and they turn into resistors. And often, after a period of time at that, they get bored with being resistors, and they turn into a dead short, and that's when problems begin. In other words, these capacitors become leaky, and I don't mean leaky in the sense that they leak fluid out of them. Leaky in the sense that they allow DC to pass through them. And in the case of an audio coupling capacitor, when DC is allowed to pass through and hits the control grid of the audio output tube, then it turns that tube on harder, and the amount of DC voltage coming out of here is what determines how hard that tube gets turned on. But at any rate, when that tube gets turned on harder than it needs to be, it draws more current through the audio output transformer, which places a load on the power supply and loads down the B plus voltage, which you saw in this radio. And in extreme circumstances, the audio output tube will burn out, the audio output transformer will burn out from too much current drawing through it, and even in very extreme circumstances, it can even burn out the overload and burn out the power transformer in radios that use such a device. This one doesn't, but it can happen, so that's why you always want to change out these old leaky wax capacitors. Just get rid of it. As far as this set goes, it has a bunch of solar seal-tight capacitors in them, and for the era, those were decent capacitors. In fact, I still run into some that check pretty good today, but I've also ran into plenty that was leaky as all get out, so they need to go too. And just because it says molded paper capacitor, indicating that it's in some kind of a plastic case, that doesn't mean it's immune from leakage. In fact, some of the ones from the 1950s, the Sprague Bumblebees and Black Beauties and the Sangamo capacitors and the Mallories and all that, a lot of those check more leaky than some of the ones from the 1930s, like these old wax-covered jobs. Okay, things are coming along nicely, and I'm checking the performance after I change a few capacitors just to make sure we don't take any steps backwards. Now, I'm trying to install these capacitors directly to the terminals in which the old ones came out of. I'm trying not to J-hook, but there's a couple of them, such as this big honking thing right here, that the leads simply were not long enough, so I had to do a little J-hooking. But I try to be as neat about it as possible. But this radio is pretty surprising. We basically have no antenna connected to it, just this little stub here.
It's in the same industry, it's using the same skill set, but it's not dependent upon weddings, many of which have been canceled. People who want something for their home, like even after a bride's married or something, sometimes I'll do a couple of things for her after their wedding, which is always super cool. Yeah.
This set has very sharp tuning, and that's one of the reasons they use the permeability tuning for better selectivity. And I don't think I've already mentioned this, but I'm pretty sure this set was made by Belmont for Coronado, which was a house brand for Gamble's department store. And the reason I say that, because the chassis in a lot of Belmont sets from this period were copper colored like this one is. And Belmont was real big on the slug tuning, so we're going to say this was made by Belmont, who also built sets for Western Auto under the True Tone brand and Montgomery Ward's under the Airline brand. So, but yeah, we'll get back to this in a minute and finish the rest of the capacitors and then move on to the next thing. And when we're done, we will analyze the capacitor condition on an old school Heathkit capacitor tester. Okay, all the capacitors are done, and I replaced a couple of resistors that had gone up significantly in value. Now, before we do anything else, I think we'll take a few minutes and analyze what we removed from the radio chassis. Here's the electrolytic bypass capacitor that's on the B+ line. It's a 10 microfarad, but it's only reading 2 microfarad, and the ESR is a bit high on it. Now, to look at these paper caps, I'm going to break out the old school capacitor test. Okay, here's our old school early 50s style Heathkit condenser tester. Battered and abused, but still works pretty good. The advantage to this type of tester is it will test condensers for leakage at working voltage. Unlike this little handheld meter here that does not have a leakage test and certainly doesn't apply enough voltage to a condenser to really do anything. But the dangers of this type of instrument is there can be up to 500 volts at the probe tips here whenever you're set to the leakage position. This has ranges for 20 volts up to 500 volts, and another disadvantage to this model is you have to be careful and make sure the capacitor is discharged before disconnecting the test leads, because you can get a nasty shock. Now, the newer Heathkit condenser testers offer a wider range of leakage voltage test from 3 volts up to 300 volts. 600 volts, what was I thinking? And it has a discharge position on the switch. But unfortunately, those testers are starting to go for stupid amounts of money in the range of $300 to $500 and more, all because a bunch of these audio fools have fallen in love with them for reforming old capacitors. Now, why you would want to waste time reforming an old electrolytic capacitor is beyond me. Yeah, it might work, but it's a ticking time bomb waiting to go off, and as cheap as new electrolytic capacitors are, there's really no point in gambling with an older one. Even these types of testers are going for stupid amounts of money now. Maybe not as much as the newer Heathkit, but they're getting on up there. And I can remember a time you could go to antique radio swap meets and ham fest, and they'd near about give you these things just to get them out of their way. Now, on this particular tester, I found that if you set it to this unmarked position and rotate it back up through the range, it will discharge the capacitor. So, but whatever kind of tester you have, you need to procure the owner's manual for it and familiarize yourself with it thoroughly before using it. First, we'll test all these solar seal type capacitors, and this honking thing is a 0.5 rated at 120 volts. Alright, it's measuring at a little over 0.5. Let's check for leakage at 20 volts. Yeah, you can see it's a little leaky. Now let's move up to 200. I won't go past that since the working voltage for the capacitor is only 120, but yeah, that capacitor is substantially leaky. Next is a 0.001 at 200. Well, that one might still be in pretty good shape. Next is a .05 at 200. I'm getting a little bit of eye opening at about .08, which is not a good sign. Yeah, that one's leaking like crazy at 20 volts. It's at 200, and we're not going to go any higher because there's no point in it. Alright, the .1 at 200, I'm getting a pretty well-defined eye opening. Let's see what we got for leakage. Yeah, that one's leaky too. And the last one is a .005 at 600. Yeah, this is some little lackluster eye opening, so alright, 20 volts, 200 volts, starting to show its ugly head a little bit. And that takes care of all the solar seal type capacitors. I guess it's like Mr. Carlson says on his channel. Those of you who watch Mr. Carlson's lab channel on YouTube, and if you don't watch it, I'd highly recommend you watching it because there's a lot of informative educational material there. But he says these solar seal tight capacitors are sealed tight to seal in the leakage. And on this particular round of solar capacitors, I tend to agree with him. And also on the note of Mr. Carlson's lab, I've recently watched a video where he demonstrated a low voltage leakage tester for testing capacitors. That something he had invented, and I haven't fully looked into the plans yet, but that's something I want to look into in the future and maybe build one. Alright, moving on, we have a .25 microfarad waxy at 200 volts. Yeah, this one's not even giving me anything either. Yeah. And I didn't even look to see what this one was. The last one was leaky as all get out. So is this one. Even at 20 volts, the light is staying on. It's not blinking, it's staying on. So it's very leaky. Alright, let's see how this 003 does. Leaky. Alright, we have one more, I believe. Alright, here's the last one. Yep, 200 volts, leaky as all get out. Now I will say all of these were very leaky, but the solar capacitors seem to be less leaky than the Sprague waxies here. And here's a box of old capacitors that I pulled out of stuff. We'll just throw those in there. I'm keeping these for in case I need extra leads to add on to a component, or if I decide to practice the art of restuffing these things, or if I find some of these that are kind of still usable I can use for resurrections. And now the darn thing's decided it's not going to play. Audio circuit's working, but no reception. But it's getting late in the day and I'm getting irritable, so we're going to give this a rest and come back down tomorrow and see what took a dump in this, because if I try too hard right now, I may end up throwing this thing, and we don't want that. Alright, I'm trying to inject a 455 kilocycle signal into the grid of the IF amplifier tube, and as you can hear, I'm not getting anything, so the trouble is somewhere here on up through the detector somewhere, so we'll have to check on that later. Well, last night something happened for the first time in my history of repairing old radios, and it may never happen again. As always happens, the model number had been worn off of the radio, so I had no idea what model it was. All I knew it was a Coronado. So I got on Nostalgia Air, and as I anticipated, there was about 10 million listings for Coronado radios And I said, well, I'll be here until this time next year going through all this. So I just looked down through the listings, and when I got down to the bottom, I saw a model number that said C4B15, and then I saw one under it, C4B16. So I said to myself, I wonder if that means Coronado 4-tube battery, and then whatever the last two digits mean. So I clicked on it, and lo and behold, first crack out of the box was the schematic for my radio. Chassis layout looks the same, so I looked up the two model numbers on the Radio Museum website, and the C4B16 is my exact radio. So yeah, that will never happen again in a million years. The first model number I click on out of 10 million of them happens to be the schematic for my radio. Okay, two problems have been located. The first one is with my battery eliminator, which is this perma-power thing here that several years ago I kind of sloppily hacked it back together to make it work, but I'm going to have to go back in it and do some refinements on it and do it a little more professional-like. Well, what I noticed happened this morning whenever I was making voltage measurements, the filament voltage was dropping too low, and when I cranked the AC input to the battery eliminator up high enough to give me the right filament voltage, the B+ voltage was way too high, and then something shorted and was dragging the B+ down. So what I did for the time being to get my 1.5 volt filament voltage was just connected the filament supply to this D-cell battery, and then use my battery eliminator for the B+, and then the B+ voltage is dropping way down. Well, last night whenever I fed a signal into the IF amplifier tube, I got nothing. So I said, well, let's just eliminate tubes. We'll eliminate that first. And when I pulled the 1N5 IF amplifier tube, our B+ voltage jumped back up. So I think we need to find one of these tubes, but just for labs, we'll test this one first and just see if it shows any shorts. And yes, it's indeed shorted. So let's go hunt up a 1N5 and see if this radio will come back to life. Okay, I borrowed a 1N5 from another radio. I'm going to have to order some of those tubes, because if we borrow a tube out of one radio to fix another one, that still puts one radio out of commission. But anyway, good tube, good emission, no grid leakage. And no shorts. So let's install this tube, keep our B+ at around 90, and see if that'll perk this radio up. Okay, turned it back on, still nothing. B+ dead, pull the IF tube, B+ comes back up. So what the devil's going on here? If I check this tube and it's shorted, then we'll know something's wrong with the chassis that's causing it. I just know I'm getting tired of this. Well, I don't know what happened, but the B+ decided to come back up. So that's one of those mysteries that may never be explained. However, our filament voltage on the battery dropped down to 1.3, and I know how these oscillator tubes can react. If the filament voltage gets just a tad bit low, they won't oscillate, but the rest of the circuit will work. And all we're getting is 1.3 volts on the filament, and on the grid of the 1A7, I'm supposed to get a negative voltage, and I'm not getting anything. Alright, what do we got here on the B+ line? Because now I'm back on the battery eliminator. I may have to 91 volts. I may have to crank its input up a little bit to get that voltage up to 1.5 and see what happens. And I'm still not getting anything, not even with 1.5 volts filament. And how much B+ do we have? 93 volts. That's not high enough to hurt anything. So now we need to figure out why this oscillator is not working. I hope the dadgum coil here didn't open up. Well, just for the heck of it, I tried injecting an IF signal into the IF amplifier, got nothing, and I found that to be strange since I replaced the IF amplifier tube and can't find anything apparently wrong in that area, so I said I better check my generator. So I connect my scope to the generator and absolutely nothing. I'll tell you what, if it's not one thing, it's three. Now I gotta go in this thing and figure out why it took a dump. I mean, yeah, it's nice having vintage test equipment, but in some cases I think it may be better to get new stuff that has a warranty on it, and that way it's going to work. But on the other hand, we all know that new stuff is often not very reliable either. But what I'm getting at is, when I'm in the middle of troubleshooting something, I need equipment that's going to freaking work. I don't need to grab the signal generator probe and get ready to use it and find out the signal generator is gone dead. Alright, I'm checking my voltages on the 1A7. 3 should have 85, 4 should have 45. So we got 92 on 3. And 50 on 4, so they're a little high, which, you know, is to be expected, really. And 5 should have our negative voltage to indicate that the oscillator is running, and it doesn't. And pin 6 has 93 volts on it. And the schematic, as smudgy as it is, looks like 81. So that's kind of high. Alright, even though the tube tests good, we all know how that works out. Tubes that test good are not always good, so I'm going to go round up another 1A7 somewhere and slap it in here and see if that will bring the radio back to life. And then there will be a signal generator repair video in the near future. Okay, I robbed another 1A7 out of a project radio. I hadn't even tested it. Let's turn it on and see what happens. Alright, is the audio section working? Yes, but I doubt anything else is. No, of course not. Why would it work? That would be too much like right. Nothing. Well, this 1A7 has good emission and no shorts, but excessive grid emission. So that can cause trouble too. And I'm about to get to the point with this radio where I'm going to remove the front end tubes, leave only the amplifying tubes, put an auxiliary jack on it, and turn this into a portable Bluetooth amplifier or whatever, since that's what tends to be the going trend with these radios now. Heck, there ain't nothing on AM worth listening to anyway. Here's the one that came out of it. See, that one has no gas, but for whatever reason it's not working in the radio, so I need to find yet another 1A7 and see what happens. Okay, I found two 1A7 tubes in my stash. Both tested good. Both yielded no results in the radio. I'm running exactly 1.5 on the filament and 90 volts B+, not getting a darn bit of oscillation. No negative voltage on the meter and nothing on the oscilloscope. So, what the devil's wrong with this? And yes, I checked the continuity of the oscillator coil, and it seems to be fine. So, what's going on with this thing? If it keeps on, I'll just yank the front end tubes out and do like I said earlier, just put an audio input jack in it, rig it up with 10 9-volt batteries and a couple of D's in parallel, and this can be somebody's portable tube amplified cell phone speaker or whatever. Alright, I'm checking the mica capacitor that's in the front end here. It's in the oscillator circuit. It's supposed to be a .00025. I'm not getting that on the meter, on the cap meter here. I'm getting a tad bit of eye deflection all the way up at .005. Testing for leakage. Not getting any leakage, but I'm certainly not measuring any value here on this capacitor. So is it open? Or has this condenser tester decided to take a dump like the signal generator did? Well, on the little handheld meter it seems to be checking okay, but not registering anything on the old school tester, so I don't know what to think of this thing. The further along we go, the further along this is coming to being converted into a Bluetooth speaker or something. Now, I'm generally not one to give up on stuff, but whenever you check over stuff and check over stuff and check over stuff and everything's wired right and everything checks good, but yet the thing still doesn't play, then I don't know what else to do. And then I keep remembering that even if I get this thing working right, it's going to receive the same 4 crap AM radio stations that every other radio around here picks up, and it'll just be something that once I get it playing and have a little fun DXing with it on the first couple of days after I get it fixed, it'll sit on the shelf for the next 20 years. So it just really doesn't motivate me to get carried away with this thing. We know the audio circuit works. We can convert this to some kind of battery-operated vacuum tube Bluetooth speaker or whatever, and that ought to make some hipster happy. I'm checking a 47 picofarad disc cap on the old school tester, and it's doing as it's supposed to do. So that tells me there's nothing wrong with the tester. Here's a 560 picofarad disc, and it's checking just like it should. So let's check the mica in this one more. Okay, I have this 250 picofarad disc capacitor, and before I say another word, and before y'all start shouting at your computer screen, I'm well aware that these are not ideal for any tuned circuit or oscillator circuit because of their instability. Temperature changes tend to cause these to drift in value, and even just drifting a very slight bit will cause the oscillator to drift, and it'll just cause you all kind of problems. But I want to tack this in temporarily just for a test and see if this thing will oscillate. It should at least do that much. Okay, I found the problem, and I feel like such a dope. You see this 3 mega ohm resistor right here? That's in the AVC line. You see that bare lead right there? It's just barely touching one of the terminals on the oscillator coil. Now watch what happens when I move it out of the way. All this wasted time, all because of that.
Out posting the video. Okay. It is. I think it was music. Help me out, wasn't it? You can't actually work out without posting the video. I thought it's a great line, right? Which is how most of the NFL seasons work out. I got it. You don't.
Now let's see what we have here on for our oscillator.
The worst shooters in the NBA.
-0.6 volts. And the reason we're changing stations is because when I touch my meter to this grid here, it changes the capacitance. That's just how sensitive this circuit is.
Well, the Chargers didn't. I talked to the Chargers.
It looks like our B plus went up some.
We have Tyrod
What are we running now?
Likely less expensive, although they never got into talking money with him.
So yeah, our B plus went up a little bit once we got rid of that.
They actually played in the playoffs a couple years
that
ago.
That resistor that was touching, that was not social distancing with the oscillator coil.
The elevator pitch. You ever heard of the elevator pitch?
Now our voltages seem to be more in line with what they should. Okay, this thing just doesn't seem as sensitive as it did when we first started. You might recall that we were doing pretty good with just this little stubby for antenna wire. Now we're not doing so hot, and I'm thinking maybe those old capacitors might have been throwing things off enough, or it was just super sensitive and the radio's indeed out of alignment. But since our signal generator took a dump, we're going to have to do this by ear. But before I stick a screwdriver down in these IF cans, I'm going to check and make sure there's no B+ voltage on the screw heads, because if there is, and I accidentally make a slip with my screwdriver, it's going to touch this metal can and create a short and spark and could possibly damage the IF transformer. So let me do that now. Alright, I'm not detecting the presence of any high voltage here, so let's do this. See if it gets any better. I guess maybe I should put it on the talk station first. No, that don't appear to be helping. Hang on. Well, now would be a good time to put the dial pointer back in place, and we're going to have to remove this cover to do that, and it's held in place by 4 of these little thingies, so we're just going to have to carefully pry them out. I've already pried one out, and then slip the needle back on and line it up and put the cover back on.
With temperatures rising to near
dial
80
pointer's
degrees
back
by
in
noon,
place.
and then there is that chance for a few showers in the afternoon and evening. Expect a high temperature of 89 degrees. I'm Storm Team 11 Chief Meteorologist Stephen Bowers for WMER 93.1 FM and 1390 AM. Good News Gospel Radio.
This weather update is brought to you by Old Town Family Pharmacy, 2024th Avenue, Meridian.
Hi, this is Misty Teresa.
Now, the next 2 things that need to be done is the speaker needs to be tended to, and it's probably going to get replaced, and this old somewhat frayed battery cable needs to be replaced, and then I think we can slide this animal back in the cabinet.
That's a good one. It wasn't like it just was Z. Yeah.
Watching over what matters most. At Meyer & Rosenbaum, we are committed to meeting our clients' insurance needs. While responsibly practicing daily social distancing, we have been here every day for the love of our clients and our community. Meyer & Rosenbaum, now located at 1901 Front Street, historic downtown Meridian.
This is Meridian's news talk station, AM 1010, WMOX. 601-482-0910. We're Praise 95.9 FM, 910 AM.
Well, I didn't expect any miraculous format changes on any of our 4 stations or any new stations to pop up.
With the depiction of him, and he said,
Only hope for AM in my area is me to dig out the little transmitter and fire it up, or maybe pick up something at night. But there certainly is no real hope for local AM, at least not as far as I'm concerned. Somebody else may want to hear what's on there, but I really don't. Here's our speaker. It's pretty rusty looking, and it's a typical, about a 3.2 ohm impedance speaker, which was pretty much your standard tube radio era speaker impedance. The problem is going to be finding something that will fit in here, because as you can see, this one is mounted with a bracket here, and I really can't mount one directly to the chassis. It's directly to the front of the chassis because the tuning assembly is in the way. Alright, the paper cone on this was just totally rotten, and it basically just fell apart when I tried to do something with it. And as you can see, it's all rusty even down where the air gap is, so I don't even think this speaker would be feasible to try to repair, even if I wanted to have it repaired. I'm just going to try to find something else to put in here and be done with it. Okay, I have a bit of a plan coming together here. The original speaker is a 5-inch, and I'm probably going to go down to a 4-inch. And no, I'm not going to use this one. I'm just using this old busted thing for mounting logistics. But I'm probably going to go down to a 4-inch, and it's probably not going to make that much difference in sound quality. And then I'm gonna, and as you can see, I have the speaker bolted to a couple of L brackets. And when I put the speaker in, the bolts will go in the opposite direction. They're just going in this way to make it easier for me to mark and drill the hole on the chassis. And then I can put the speaker on the chassis, something like this, and mount it that way. But there's only one problem. The tuning assembly is in the way of one of these holes that I'm going to have to drill. And so I'm going to have to dismount the tuning assembly, as bad as I don't want to, because that's going to foul up the dial string most likely. And then I can bolt the speaker in and then put the tuning assembly back in place. But first I've got to dig up a good 4-inch speaker that I can use. Okay, I remove the dial, and I have the tuning assembly back enough where I can drill through here without fear of the drill bit coming through and tearing the tuning assembly up. Alright, the speaker mounting brackets are now installed. One of them's a tad bit crooked, but just barely, and I'm not going to worry about it. So now I need to find a suitable speaker that's good. Hopefully I can find one in my junk stash. And then we need to reattach the dial here and restring it. And then hopefully there won't be any problems. I was able to get this main tuning coil assembly out and back far enough to where I could drill through without the drill bit coming through and destroying the thing, because if had that happened, I might as well have just thrown the radio in the garbage. Okay, I dug around and found a 5-inch speaker. Had to mount it a little bit unconventional, but at least I didn't just leave it flopping around in the cabinet. As you can see, I have it attached to these L brackets. And I had to patch this speaker, but it seems to sound okay. And it's in a lot better shape than what came out of it, and looks more period correct. Now, I could have gotten on eBay and ordered a little 4-inch Chinese speaker, but my experience with those is they just don't sound as good as these older speakers. Like most of the other cheap junk out of China, it is what it is, junk. And this speaker sounds pretty good.
Now, it was originally July 12th, and it was moved to June 26th.
Like you're on square lane, you're not.
Like, if we're open back up, are you going to go to... I feel like people will fly. I don't know if... Yeah.
Sensitivity is still kind of lacking on this set.
You know, they wouldn't...
And I have an idea why, but I guess before we dig into that, we need to go ahead and put the dial back on here.
Oh, man.
Green light letter from President.
Alright, we've got the dial and all that back on. The speaker's in place. It lines up with the front of the cabinet perfectly. However, I accidentally have the speaker shifted to the side a little bit, so it doesn't exactly center up with the grill and the radio, but that's fine. I'm not tearing all this back out. I'm not re-drilling holes in the chassis. It's just going to have to be that way, and it'll still work just fine.
Kind of normalcy, and again, it's frivolous in the grand...
Order. It's next. The loss of a loved one is never easy, with so many...
Well, that's why I think the opportunity is there for baseball. When I use the word resent, I use that...
Now for a battery set, this has pretty good tonal quality.
As well, or issues that's here, but I'm saying the general fan that's out there, and especially in this climate where there's so
much sensitivity still seems to be lacking a little bit, so that'll be the next thing we try to address. And you see what I had to do on the speaker. I had to add some washers between the actual speaker itself and the bracket, because this part of the bracket was getting in the way and hitting this speaker basket and not allowing the speaker to stand up straight. So we solved that problem. And this wire here is the ground wire for the speaker, the original speaker had that terminal tied to the speaker frame, and then of course the speaker frame was bolted to the chassis, so that provided the ground return, but this speaker didn't have that, so I simply had to run a wire from the other terminal to the chassis to complete the circuit, and it works really well.
And inform you weekdays.
I'm still having to get used to the control placement on this set. Usually the off-on volume is here and tuning is over here, but this one's just the opposite. Well, we can tell that this dial assembly was also used on an AC operated set because we have a provision for a dial lamp socket to be mounted. Now you may be asking yourself, why did none of the battery radios have dial lights on them? Well, some did, but I'll get into that in a minute. But most of these types of battery radios didn't have dial lights on them because the dial lamp consumed a lot of current. And back then, in the 30s and 40s, batteries were not nearly as long-lasting as they are today, and batteries were expensive, and during World War II, batteries were often hard to get, so if you had a good battery, you had to make it last. In fact, a friend of mine told me that during the war, they had an old battery Silvertone radio, and the only time they were allowed to turn it on was for about 5 or 10 minutes in the afternoon to get the war news, and then they'd better turn it off. He went on to say his daddy didn't play around and he always meant business, and if he came in and caught one of us with the radio turned on when it wasn't supposed to be on, the results wouldn't have been pretty. But you look at these two, all four are wired in parallel, which equals about 250 milliamps. Now if we were to add a dial bulb in the mix, that would be another 150 to 250 mils, depending on what bulb you used, and that would just drain the battery down all the more faster. Now, there were some upscale battery-operated sets that used dial bulbs, but most of them were connected to a momentary switch, so when you wanted to set your dial, you just hold the switch down and tune it, and then let the switch go. That way the bulb's not on all the time. And I've also had people ask me why there were no farm battery radios with tuning eye tubes. Well, number one, I don't think they made a tuning indicator tube that would operate off of a 1.5 volt filament. I could be wrong about that, but I've never heard of one. And still, adding a tuning eye, that would just be more current drain, and on these little farm radios that were designed to operate on 1.5 and 90 volts, the design was pretty much kept bare bones for the most part. For that reason, they wanted you to be able to get all the life you could out of that battery. Now there were some battery sets that ran off of either 32 volts DC or 6 volt DC and often used a vibrator or based power supply. Now, most of those had dial lamps and tuning eye tubes. Some of them did, but that's a completely different story. Those are running off of big storage batteries that are being charged by either a windmill or a generator. So, those do tend to have dial lights and sometimes tuning eyes, but not these kind of radios. Now, if I wanted to put a dial light in this set, I could and just wire a momentary switch to the battery, but I don't know that I'm going to go to that effort. This originally had no dial light, and I'll probably keep it that way.
The tank, but tremendous player. 5.9 FM and Praise 910 AM says, congratulations to the graduating class of 2020.
This past season.
All right, we'll come back after dark and check the sensitivity of this, but I think we still need to do a little more investigating into this.
deferred my loans for a while. So
okay, I swapped out the 1A7 converter tube for one that works a little better. And it seems to oscillate at lower filament voltage than the other one did.
Just kind of got excited
Let's see.
And then we had kind of this other moment where we would commute into work every day.
1.2 volts, and we're still oscillating.
We kind of waved to each other driving down the interstate. And it kind of occurred to me that maybe we could just
find
go down
a clip
to 1
lead. I want to try to demonstrate something here.
Feels amazing.
All right, we have 1.2 volts on the filament. I'm going to lower the AC voltage going into the battery eliminator, and of course the filament voltage will go down too since it's not regulated. And let's see what point it stops oscillating.
Well, thank you for doing that. So you did not only went through the class, you actually are coordinating.
Yeah, we love
cool.
it.
Well, and then you're kind of like stuffing it in the face of these people that are saying
Yeah,
millennials.
1.1, we're still working a little bit.
Touchdown, baby!
It's possible.
It's not only possible, it's probable when you decide. And you guys are doing it. You're incredible. Well done. All right, Jeff and Steph from Indianapolis.
I think our B plus is going down. Of course, too. Of course it is. Okay, it doesn't appear to be oscillating now. Alright, 88 volts B plus, that's still plenty enough in that department, but now the filament voltage is down just a little bit too low for the tubes to have full emission. I'm checking at the grid for the oscillator. I'm going to bring this back up and see if a negative voltage jumps up here. Yep, we're starting to appear. Of course, we're not going to get any stations now because there's enough capacitance with this probe connected to detune the thing.
While they're doing that, or dog gets walked, or whatever it is they had promised that they were going to execute. They commit.
Alright, that's at 1.29 volts. Let's put the original 1A7 back in and see what it does.
Riding across town.
Alright, the 1A7 that came in the set, we're still at 1.2 volts on the filament, and I hear no activity. So let's crank it up. See, it don't start coming up till we get to 1.4 volts.
Brief here. Confession. Budgeting hasn't always come naturally for me.
Now, even though this old tube will work, it's obviously borderline. And if we were running this off of a battery supply, which we may very well be doing down the road, it's not going to take long for that battery voltage, especially under load, to fall below 1.4, 1.5 volts. And if that happens, when that happens, with this original tube, the radio is not going to play. So we want the strongest tube possible in there. So when it falls down to 1.2, 1.3 volts, 1.4 volts, the radio will still operate. Now keep in mind, this tube tested great on a tube tester. Now, they want you to check it at 2 volts. So that could have something to do with it, but even at the 1 volt setting, the tubes still check pretty good, so that just proves that you can't always test a tube. You can't try that again. You can't always trust a tube tester. Usually the best test for a tube is how does it operate in the circuit under various parameters that the circuit is going to be subjected to. In this case, various parameters, meaning the input voltage to the set, that's obviously going to change as the batteries weaken. Or if you're using an unregulated power supply like this, a battery eliminator, it's going to change based on your incoming AC line voltage, which is known to fluctuate. Testing the 1H5 detector and first audio tube. Here's the triode section, which is for the first audio portion. Bad. And the diode section, also very weak. Let's check a diode section for tube number 2. And that pegs the meter. Dadgum. And the triode section. Let's stick it in the radio and just see what happens. WABL 1480 out of Mobile is coming in and out. Alright, I fixed this frayed wire on the plug here. Just cut off the frayed portion, just shortened it up. Got another frayed wire here, but I don't have any heat shrink small enough. I generally don't keep electrical tape on hand, so I guess I need to order both of those things. Eventually this is going to get some nice, fresh, new, colorful hookup wire, but I don't have any of that either, and wire is expensive, so that's just going to have to wait a little while. Here it is back together. Let's see if they showed a picture of it looking like this on eBay. Somebody would have probably bid on it, but when you post a picture of a radio with a chassis just hanging out of it, and you can't see the knobs or anything, then you're not going to get too much action. In fact, this thing ran through about 3 or 4 times before I finally decided to bid on it. And the only reason I bid on it is because I caught a glimpse of the dial pointer laying down in there, so...
Today at AppliancePartsPros.com. You may feel...
Now what I intend to do, like I said, is order some hookup wire and rewire this wiring harness. I'm going to try to keep the original plug. I'm going to build a battery box for this using 2 D-cell batteries, maybe 3 in parallel for the tube filaments, and 99-volt batteries wired in series for the plate voltage. Now for the 9-volt batteries, the El Cheapo ones will work just fine since there's not that much drain on the plate supply line, but for the filaments I need to get the best alkaline batteries that I can find because that's pretty high drain. And we're not going to use cloth covered wire here. I'm just going to get standard plastic insulation or PVC or whatever it's made out of, hookup wire, and rewire it with that. And an advantage to using battery power is no interference that might be riding on the AC line.
Learn more at NationalGuard.com.
I don't know if that's WSM trying to come in or not, but also when I fix my signal generator, I'll do a proper alignment on this. But right now, it's good to go.
You have a hospice recommendation from your doctor. You need the best help available. Harper's Hospice Care is a local...
After Christ's resurrection is met routinely.
Probably 1090 out of Little Rock.
News, I'm Rich Dennison. Today, deeming places of worship essential and ordering they be immediately reopened.
I consider them essential, and that's one of the things we're saying. We're going to make that essential. You know, they have places essential that aren't essential, and they open, and yet the churches aren't allowed to open, and the synagogues, and again, places of faith, mosques.
The release of federal guidelines on the safe reopening of places of worship were just released yesterday. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he's open to another coronavirus economic stimulus.
Increasingly expected, he says, in normal circumstances, team travel parties routinely exceed 50 people. Hall of Fame basketball coach. Back in the saw over 200.
San Houston, Pasadena, Clear Lake, Galveston.
Actually, all I have to do is tune into one of the 4 local AM stations and listen for more than a minute, and I'm pushed over the edge. And not in a good way.
He left cruise upon his furious scout.
Before you were hoping with Bucky Brooks to talk a little.
Insurance Company. I'm Pete Thompson. Richard Chamberlain, owner of Chamberlain's Shop House, talks about his strategy to survive after the stay-in-place.
It's a little after 8 in the evening here. Just got dark here a few minutes ago.
Visit Dave Ramsey. Connections.
Hello, this is Charles Frazier with Wagon's Restaurant. As we all adjust to life in a...
Yeah, not much on the lower end of the band. When it gets a little later, maybe something will come in. Alright, here we are powering the filaments from a single D-cell battery that's been here for years. It's probably on its way out. Still using the 90 volts from the power supply. We're measuring 1.4 volts under load. And when I turn it off, it jumps up to 1.5, so as you can tell, the load of the filaments is putting a little bit of a drag on this battery, which is expected.
Insurers are 3 amazing products.
But here's the deal. When we're powering the filaments from a battery, absolutely no hum whatsoever. So that's the advantage of battery power. When I was powering the filament from the power supply, I was getting some hum in the audio. It's getting later and WSM's starting to make an appearance. Dial pointer's a little off. Like I said, I need to go back in here and realign this when I get the signal generator working, but that'll come later. Wonder if that's 1480 coming in. It's coming in pretty good. I wish it'd come in that good all the time. Okay, I just got my wire order in from Antique Electronics Supply, along with some number 47 dial bulbs and some alligator clip test leads and some rubber motor mounting grommets for record players. I've been needing this stuff for the longest time, but just wasn't in a position to turn loose of the money. Well, Memorial Day weekend, they were having a 10% off sale plus free shipping plus no sales tax, so I just went ahead and got enough wire to last me a while. Got many colors of it in both stranded and solid core varieties, so we should be able to rewire quite a few radios with this, that is if they need rewiring. So now we can rewire the battery cable on the Coronado, and that ought to be all it needs. And these test leads, I'm sure they're the standard modern day Chinese variety where they just crimp the wire onto the alligator clip. So I'll probably go through all these and solder them on permanently. And you got to be real careful with the clips on these too, because they're pretty easily damaged. I can't tell you how many of these I've gone through over the past 30 years. And this hookup wire that they sell comes in 2 varieties, 300 volt and 600 volt. I went ahead and ordered the 600 volt variety just for that little extra margin of safety. and there might be some applications where the voltage involved approaches the 600 volt mark, so I want to have the right stuff on hand. They also sell the cloth covered wire too, but I didn't want to go that far. I've already spent more than I really wanted to spend just on this, and I'm not that much of a purist. The only time I might use the cloth covered wire is for something that's seen from the outside of the chassis, but for something that's under the chassis, I'm really not that worried about it. Here's a BNC type probe for my signal generator that I'm about to convert from using the old style obsolete microphone plug to a BNC jack, but the BNC connectors haven't arrived yet, so I can't use this today. My old signal generator came with the 70-plus year old probe that was likely on it whenever it was new, and I've been having trouble with it breaking, and I'll fix it and it'll break again or short out. Just old insulation's no good on it anymore, and I'm just tired of fooling with it, and I'm not going to pay what they want for a modern day reproduction probe like what would fit on it. I'm not knocking the guy for what he charges. If I'd put together probes like that, I'd charge that price too, but I'd rather just convert the signal generator over to use a modern BNC type jack, and that way I'm more flexible with what I can plug into it. You know, with a BNC connector on your test equipment, if something happens to one of your test leads, you can just order a new one for a few dollars and you're back in business. Now, some may want to know, what's the deal with solid conductor wire and stranded conductor wire? On the left, you'll see an example of solid conductor wire, and on the right, you see an example of stranded conductor wire. Well, the solid conductor wire is primarily used in situations where the wire won't be flexed or messed with, such as under the chassis. And it's also used in situations where it may not be desirable for the wire to, shall we say, vibrate and get moved to a location where it doesn't need to be moved to, because this wire is much stiffer. The stranded conductor wire is primarily used in applications where the wire might get bent. For example, for connecting a loop antenna to the chassis of the radio, or for connecting the speaker to a radio, or for connecting a battery cable to a radio. Those are wires that have the potential to be bent in the process of moving them around and such by the user. And for that purpose, stranded conductor wire is preferable. If you use this solid conductor wire for, say, a battery cable or such, that wire is probably going to break after fiddling with it a few times. This solid conductor wire breaks much easier than this stranded wire here does. However, if you're using this solid conductor wire for under chassis wiring, where the wiring is not going to be disturbed by the user, then it's perfectly fine. But for a speaker cable or a battery cable or something like that, antenna cable that's going to be moved around by the user of the equipment, you need to use this more flexible stranded wire. And just as a side note, whenever you connect stranded wire to something, before you do so, you should first twist the wire to make sure there are no little strands sticking out that could short out anything, and then you need to tin the wire to be connected to the terminal with your hot soldering iron and solder, and in that way you'll make a better solder connection, and you won't have to worry about any little strandies possibly coming unloose and sticking out and shorting to anything down the road. Now we need to determine what color wires to use. From an electrical standpoint, the circuit doesn't care what color the insulation is. All it cares about is the conductor that's inside that insulation. But from a servicing standpoint, it's best to color code your wires properly to make it easier to trace the circuit out should the need arise down the road. Now I'm looking at the schematic diagram of this Coronado radio, and they have blue for B+, gray for B-, which they didn't have any gray, so I'll just have to use another color, red for A+, and black for A-, and they have a green jumper here to jump the two 45-volt battery connections together. Now the only color I don't have, like I said, is gray, so we'll have to use another color for that, which that won't be any problem because, like I said, the circuit doesn't care what color the insulation is. Since we don't have any gray wire, I think I'll use yellow for the B- connection, since that's the color that's used on one of my other radios. Alright, first we'll change this green jumper out, and probably what we want to do is gently lock this plug into some vice grip pliers, and then I will heat the end of this with my soldering iron, and when the solder melts, then I'll pull the lead out, and then I'll use my solder sucker and my desoldering braid to remove any solder that might be blobbing up the hole. That way we'll have a through hole, and then I'll stick the new wire through the hole, solder it up, cut off the excess, and remember we're using stranded wire for this operation. Okay, here's our green B+ battery jumper. It connects from the positive terminal of one of the 45-volt batteries to the negative terminal of the other 45-volt battery to give us 90 volts. Now, of course, in order for me to replace this other wiring, I'm going to have to remove the chassis from the radio and unsolder the wiring from under the chassis, and then solder new wiring in its place. And as you probably figured out, this dye that they use to color this wire has long since faded. In most cases, it all looks the same color by now, so that's why you want to do it one wire at a time and pay particular attention to what you're doing, because the last thing you want to do is get the B+ voltage and the filament voltage mixed up, because you'll be burning out a set of tubes if you do that. You know, they could cut down on the cost of this wire if they wouldn't use a whole roll of saran wrap to cover it up for packaging. Alright, here we are with our cable made. I used clear tape to hold it together, and I left plenty of stretch room at the end in case this ever is connected to, say, reproduction batteries that are like the originals. There'll be plenty enough room to move the plugs apart to plug the batteries in. Now all we got to do is fish it through the radio chassis and disconnect the other cable and get it out, and of course we'll need to tie a knot in this to keep the cable from being pulled out of the chassis. Alright, I have the battery cable wires completed, as well as a couple of fresh new antenna wires.
Elected office of give me a bit of a boost and got 9. They get back.
Disappointment in
Alright, there's WSM. Alright, there we are with a nice colorful new battery cable and a couple of antenna leads. The black is ground, white is the antenna, of course. I don't have any, but I'm probably going to order some and just put a couple of alligator clips on the ends of these wires here to facilitate easy connection to an outside antenna, because on this you really need a good outside antenna, and probably a ground to a cold water pipe wouldn't hurt either.
Even if I die, I do not.
That's our ultra highly modulated gospel station, and I'm running this fully off of the battery eliminator. That's why we have a little hum, and we've determined that that hum is on the filament supply. It's not really horrible, but with these tubes being directly heated, meaning the filament and the cathode are one and the same, it's going to be nearly impossible to get rid of that little bit of hum when running it off the AC supply. One day soon I'm going to rig up a battery supply to run this thing like it was ran 80 years ago, with a bank of 9 volts in series and a couple of D's in parallel for the filament.
Great. Man has his hand, and they're handcuffed. What I know is when the man is not
It seems like everything over the past couple of days has shifted from COVID-19 discussions to the all the rioting that's been going on.
My Spanish skills in real life. Doctor. My soul. You are my father. It's true, but it really is true.
The little boys with maybe in the driveway when he would go in the house, he would be listening. Down the middle of the place.
I think that's WSM trying to be bashful.
Would like it to go. So as you see police here roping off this area, this is Ted Turner Drive and Walton Street. The accident appears to have happened at Ted Turner and Marietta Street. So this is going to be roped off for a significant amount of time. Anytime an officer is injured, police are definitely making sure that every aspect of this will be properly investigated, and they don't want anybody to get past the crime scene to contaminate the...
It's got to be WSB out of Atlanta.
Anybody, but especially Atlanta police officers. And Matt, that's what you alluded to, right? That the goal here was to have nobody. Yes. That's 800-244.
Concert tickets and T-shirts and all kinds of
Kick the coverage with Clay Travis. The English Premier League is going to be back now.
Isn't that how you do it? Support the work of 40's.
Visit us at the intersection of Clarkson and Clayton Road in Ellisville, just 4 miles south of I-64.
Locally and family owned, Metro Lighting has been serving St. Louis since 1967. They provide ultimate customer service while offering an unbeatable...
See if they're running music tonight or a ball game. It's got to be KMOX.
Best price you can feel the store.
Well, no Route 66 tonight, unfortunately.
Against Mueller in that
you know, they're bad people and get them off the streets. And I've heard that before, and you'll be stereotyped as a bad person just because of your race.
Right. And that shouldn't happen. Without a doubt, that should not happen. Well, what I do know about this case...
Driving was so dangerous. Now it's somebody.
Now, where's my country station?
Today. And give Minneapolis back to some sense of peace.
Well, first of all, you start with the law. And you don't want to break any laws. You start with people's constitutional rights and petition government and protest. And then you say some of the things that we've been talking about. These are your businesses. I mean, if Target decides to pull out of this community because of what happened, that hurts the whole community. And so we need to educate people. And there's a way of going about doing things. And two wrongs don't make a right. And we need to really get people to understand that. And once again, look at some short-term solutions. Talk about short-term solutions. And then talk about long-term solutions. Some of the things that I mentioned earlier. And if they understand you and respect you as a person, because you have to have the right message. And so those would be the messages that I would get out to the community to try to calm things down rather than steering it up.